Well, welcome to the Miami Book Fair, Ruth. Very nice to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. Tell us about a bit about this book.
Well, this is a book of poetry, Everything I Kept, Todo lo que guardé, and the poems are in English and Spanish, and they're poems about different kinds of feelings, love, sadness, loss, desire. Who knows? It's all there.
Everything's there.
Everything. It's like my heart and soul are in this book. That's when I go to poetry. That's what goes to poetry is heart and soul. Heart and soul. Just
and that's what's gonna help all your feelings come on and all the poetry.
Yeah, very much. I mean, there's poems that are kind of invoking my family and many generations of exile and journeys and diaspora, and my father's side of the family was originally from Spain, from 15th century Spain. They were expelled from Spain. They were Sephardic Jews, and then they ended up in Turkey eventually, and then they ended up in Cuba. So all those journeys in some way have ended up having an impact on me as the kind of person that I am. So I have a lot of fears. I mean, one of my poems is called Miedos, and it's about all the miedos I have, all my fears. So that's in there. But there's also a poem called Prayer, called Rezo, and also about kind of praying and remembering the ancestors and kind of what they went through. They went through so much more than I ever did, but their journeys led to my being able to be a writer. So I'm also very grateful to them for all the journeys that they took. So that's in there too, and also just love and sorrow and loss. The ocean is a very big character in the book as well. I have several poems about the ocean, about the sea. There have been moments, I love the ocean, but there have been moments when I've been really scared to go into the sea. So there's a poem called El Mar, the sea, which is about that. There's also a poem about gathering all these seashells from the ocean and then thinking, why did I take all these seashells? I should give them back to the ocean. So this thing about todo lo que guardé, I keep things, and then I think, why did I keep them? They didn't belong to me. They belong to the ocean. So it's kind of these meditations on these different sorts of feelings.
It leads into our first question. It's like, what literary pilgrimage have you gone on in order to write this book?
Well, it's been a long pilgrimage. These poems and Everything I Kept, I started them a long time ago. So I started them like 20 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've been working on these poems for a long time. And some of them were published in Cuba, actually. So I'm known as a poet in Cuba because I also write in Spanish. So some of them already, are well known in Cuba, but they had never appeared here in a book. A couple of them had appeared in magazines and so on, but they'd never appeared in their entirety in a book and bilingually in this way. So the journey was, I'm also an anthropologist by training, so I'm used to traveling, and I've spent periods of my life in Spain and Mexico and in Cuba. So those journeys are part of my life. So that's like a very specific and real journey where I've actually lived outside of the United States for many years. I love speaking hablar español. And so to have the possibility of speaking Spanish and all the different ways that Spanish is spoken in different countries, which I love, has been wonderful. So that's been part of my journey, has been just the fact of being an anthropologist and sort of having a passport to be able to travel as an anthropologist. But I've always loved literature. I've always loved fiction and poetry as well. And poetry is something I've been doing since I was a teenager. I would, write poems in my notebooks. So poetry was always something very deep, and it's kind of bigger for me than anthropology or fiction. I feel like I said before, that poetry is like this thing that's like the biggest thing because it's the heart and it's the soul, it's the feelings. I don't need to write about anything specific in a sense. I don't need to write about anything that I actually did. It can just be how I felt, right?
At that moment.
At that moment. Poetry is, going after the feelings. So it's kind of having taken all of these real journeys to real places to finally get to the journey of the heart and the soul, the imaginative journey, the journey of feelings that are so hard sometimes to describe.
Yeah.
And that's why you need poetry. And what I love about poetry is you can put a lot of words on the page, and then actually what you try to do is remove as many as you can. So only the words that most need to be there are on the page. Yeah.
And speaking of emotions and in the journey, do you think that a person can become a writer if they don't feel these emotions strongly?
Well, they could. I mean, I think potentially why not? I think anybody could be a writer if they just want to do it, and put the energy into it and, and be ready for a lot of disappointment. You have to be a little bit of a masochist to be a writer, because you put so much into it, and sometimes people get excited about what you do, and sometimes they don't.
That's true.
You don't know. So you have to have, a little bit of a cara dura, and sort of like, know that you're really doing this because you need to do it, and you don't know if you're going to find readers that love your work or don't love your work. You just don't know. That's a mystery. So I feel that yes, anybody could potentially be a writer, but they have to be ready to suffer a little bit as a writer. I think that's important. But I think writing comes from feelings, but sometimes you learn the craft, and then you find the feelings to use that craft on. So
to help you improve.
To help you improve, exactly. To help you articulate because that's the problem with feelings, is they're very inchoate, and they're very, very hard to describe, right? I mean, they're ineffable.
Yes.
That's what makes them feelings. Like, how do I say this? So it's so hard. So you might not have the feelings, but maybe you have the craft. Maybe you take a poetry course and learn about poetry, and you're inspired by another poet, and then maybe in that process you get to the feelings. So you can start with the feelings, or you can start with the craft, but you sort of need both.
Yes.
You need both.
To tie them in.
To tie them in, yeah.
All right, thank you so much for spending some time with
Thank
us,
you.
Ruth.
Nice to be here.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. Now, do I get my pastelito?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.